getting a job is like dating, right? You kind of have to feel each other out. If it's a good fit for you, but it's not a good fit for them, they're not going to hire you. If it's a great fit for them, but not a good fit for you, and you end up in that job, you'll be miserable, right? So I think it's important to network because it helps open doors, but it also helps you learn about what the opportunities even are.
Welcome back, Wolfpack fans. Today, our guest is Dr. Devin Hubbard, Teaching Associate Professor at the UNC-NC State Lampe Joint Department of Biomedical Engineering.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So glad you're here. You hold a PhD and master's degree in biomedical engineering from that same program. I know it's unusual to stay where you are taught, but you did it, so you've proven it can be done. And your undergrad is from UNC in biochemistry. Devin specializes in medical device design, rapid prototyping, and engineering education. And he's known for his hands-on, student-centered approach in the classroom. So that's a little bit about you, my friend. Welcome aboard.
Very flattering introduction. Thank you for having me today. And I also host a podcast too. So
you do. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons that we met, actually. So I'm glad that I'm able to be here today because now we can steal and share ideas from each other, which is great.
I think that's what podcasters do. They just go on each other's show and promote their own show.
Totally. So,
we can make that happen for sure. So I would love you to give your 30-second elevator pitch if you stepped on today with this listener. What would you want them to know about you?
Yeah, I think your description is fairly accurate of me. I would describe myself as a fairly energetic person who feels very strongly that if I'm very much an educator, right? I love to teach things and I love to be able to interact with students. And so, yeah, I think your summary is pretty bang on. I'm also a pretty hardcore tinkerer. I love to tinker with things and learn things. I'm definitely a lifelong learner. I've been involved in the communications element of things as part of the podcast, which I'm sure we'll talk about here today. And so, yeah, I think if I were giving the summary, I'm definitely a scientist by training who is, also a very enthusiastic individual who's easily excitable about any nerdy subject that you could imagine.
Wonderful. And we will link to the BME Grad podcast in our show notes. And you've had many episodes while you are the host for that one. And it's incredible the conversations you've had with alumni. It's very possible I binged the entire season to learn because I was starting a podcast here. And I wonder if there is anything that inspired you to start the show and maybe even an episode. This is super hard that really stuck out to you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's back up. The show was actually started by, speaking of alumni, I would say, obviously biased here, but BME alumni are incredible. And I love how much they're engaged and they like to give back. This podcast was actually started by a number of our alumni from the joint program. There was two students whose home base was UNC and then a student from NC State. Started the podcast a number of years ago. And the reason they started it was because they found as biomedical engineers, they got close to the end of their career in undergrad and didn't even know the names of job titles, right? So they were trying to apply to jobs, but they also didn't really know what to look for. And then the whole chaos of trying to graduate and interview and find a job and know what's fair and even do I have the right skills for this? I think it made it hard for them to understand what the options were and to compete well for them. So one of the intentions of the podcast, actually I'd say the primary one, is to help educate potential engineers and biomedical engineers in particular and their parents on the subject of the professional opportunities for biomedical engineers. And so frequently you'll notice that we have guests on who talk about what they do in industry, right? So we've had some folks from regulatory affairs who come in and say, hey, I worked at the FDA. Here's what I did at the FDA. And if you're interested in that kind of work, here's what you can do to prepare. And a lot of these episodes include discussion of what I wish I'd known. And so that's the primary purpose of it. This past season, we actually focused a lot on career development and how I should prepare myself for interviews and the job application cycle. Or for folks that were sophomores and juniors, what do I look for in internships or co-op opportunities? So this past season was kind of interesting in the sense that we had some guests on whose specific purpose was not to talk about their careers, but more to give advice on how to prep for an interview, how to build your resume, what should you be doing with your summers, that kind of stuff. So we have some episodes, and actually I was reflecting on this season and some of the recordings that we've done. And I think if I were to suggest one of my favorite episodes from this season was an interview that we did with Barbara Senich. And she spent her whole career in the pharmaceutical industry, but she also was very acutely aware of career building for other people, which is incredible. And she came on the podcast and just gave wonderful advice about how to interview and how to negotiate, in particular, a new job. So I think if I were to pick one episode for folks to go listen to, it would be that episode. It was from the most recent season of the BME Grad podcast. But all the alumni who come on our program and all the guests that we've had are just so fabulous. It's hard to pick one.
Everyone has a story, and it's really wonderful to give that stage. You and I both share that passion.
I could talk for hours to these folks. In fact, I often end up talking for hours to the folks that come on our podcast. And we only get 20 minutes on our podcast to talk. So we have to kind of trim it down. I mean, we don't record the hours and hours. We just try to choose judiciously what material we're going to have. But anyway, that's the idea behind the podcast. And the inspiration was actually the students started it to help out with professional development and career development. And then they asked us, they were a couple years after they graduated. They asked the department to take it over, and they specifically asked if I would host it. And of course, I was quite happy to. I also hosted another podcast before that I had just finished hosting when they asked me to. So at first I was sort of like, I don't know if I'm a good fit. But after listening to their episodes and in the position that I sit in the department where I teach our capstone and our design sequence. And it's very heavily focused on, the sort of industry elements of things. So we have all of our students are working on medical devices. So we have a lot of industry partners, and we do a lot of professional development in the class. So I'm quite passionate about helping students build their professional skills. And so naturally, I think the podcast kind of fits what I'm interested in and what I'm used to communicating and asking questions about and stimulating conversation around. So
you and I share that, Devin, the interest in professional development. And this is why we are able to have these conversations. And I know that in your role with students, you help them not only develop their technical skills, but their professional development skills. And a lot of people will joke about engineers and say, oh, they're introverted and they're staring at their shoes when they talk to people. And there's so much they need to learn about how to interact with the working world and be successful. So what would you say would be maybe the one most important professional skill that you think engineering students underestimate? And why does it matter a lot in the real world when they're done being students and their professional identity begins?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, to comment really quickly on the comment about stigma associated with engineering, in a lot of cases, I think it's somewhat of a product of the way that we teach the subject. And there's a lot of focus on the technical elements, which is important, to be very clear. I think you have to be a great engineer, you have to be really good at the technical components. To be the best version of an engineer, it is my strong opinion that you also need to be good at communication and networking. You have to be able to manage teams. You have to work on a team well together. And so it's hard to pick one skill, but if I were to group them together, I would say network and communication are the two things that I think are the most important things that are not necessarily incorporated directly into the technical components of an engineering degree. And I'd say that's probably across the board, not just biomedical engineering. But one of the things that we try to do in our class, in particular capstone, is teach those communication elements. We, on the first day of class, for example, I have every student stand up. And I know people hate public speaking, right? But I have them all stand up and I have them give a 30-second pitch about themselves. Now, the setup for this is that I don't give them enough time to prep it, which we do on purpose. It's meant to be a ludicrous activity where students have like 15 minutes to put together a single slide, which is 30 seconds long, and I time them, right? And I don't cut them off, but I let them know. For a number of reasons, I want them to learn, like, how long does 30 seconds feel when you're up on stage? That 30-second elevator pitch is designed to be ridiculous so that everybody feels ridiculous in some way. Like, it's okay to make mistakes because there's no way not to make a mistake when you don't have enough time to prep. And it kind of puts everybody at ease with the idea that I'm going to stand up in front of folks and it's okay to make a mistake. The idea being that over the course of the year, right, they all learn how to confidently present, even if they don't like it. And I acknowledge that. Like, not everybody's going to like it, but I want them to be good and confident at it. We also do technical writing, but we also, very importantly, have them work with folks that are not in their discipline. And learning the language of other people, I think, is really important. The communication element, I think, is really important. And I think it's hard to stress how important it is. And I will just say that the examples that I would pull of students who get it are ones who've done internships or who have gone into the professional world and say, oh, I get it now. I understand why I have to be able to work with somebody who is in accounting. I understand why I need to be able to communicate clearly with the marketing team. But I also understand how to communicate with the manufacturing floor folks that are running the machines, right? And so the ability to sort of switch languages, if you want to call it that, that's maybe not the right way of phrasing it, but the ability to communicate across disciplines, I think is extremely important. And I think if you're looking for a job, that will come across in your interview if you communicate that. And also, building your network is much easier if you can learn to communicate. And I would argue that building your network is equally, if not more important than communication, because if you build your network, it may not be that you even network with somebody to find a job, right? Like, I don't even advocate for that. I suggest just go meet people, find out what the culture is like at a place. Learn, what is it like to work on these teams? Because for, getting a job is like dating, right? You kind of have to feel each other out. If it's a good fit for you, but it's not a good fit for them, they're not going to hire you. If it's a great fit for them, but not a good fit for you, and you end up in that job, you'll be miserable, right? So I think it's important to network because it helps open doors, but it also helps you learn about what the opportunities even are.
I like the way you described that, and I completely agree about the communication and networking. And that elevator pitch, that is such a hard activity for students to do. They freak out. I would have athletes in my class who make mistakes in front of thousands of people. And then when I ask them to do an elevator pitch, they freeze up. And I'm thinking, you can do this. Why is it the biggest fear over sharks? You will not die doing your elevator pitch. But when you talked about this relationship building, Devin, I love that notion. And I wonder, after teaching hundreds of students over your career, how do students struggle with developing relationships, and what tips do you have to give them to help them get over some of those struggles?
I think there's a few things. So, networking is awkward, right? At baseline, I can go to a networking event and I'm a very outgoing person and I just don't like networking, right? Not because I don't enjoy meeting people, because the whole concept, this like contrivance that you're like going somewhere to network is quite entertaining to me. And it's easy to attach to my friends. Like if I knew you, I'd be like, oh, Marcy, I'm going to come find you. And I challenge my students, if they're going to a networking opportunity, to make rules with their friends about this. So I say, okay, networking is awkward at best, right? 9 times out of 10, you're going to meet somebody who probably isn't, you're not going to do much for them and they're not going to be able to do much for you. And that's okay. You'll just continue that conversation. When it ends, you move on to the next person. But I challenge them to bring business cards with them or a resume. And I say, make it a game, in the sense of you and your 4 friends are going to go and you're going to make it a game to not talk to each other. Now, there's an exception to this rule, but I'll get to that. And your goal is to give away at least 5 or 10 business cards to somebody in an hour. And then you're going to get back together with your friends and you're going to tell each other about who you met. Because maybe somebody you talk to is helpful to another friend and you can make an introduction. That's what network's about. The exception to this rule that I was mentioning earlier would be like, if you and I went up to network and I'm like kind of playing backup for you. I hate to use the term wingman, but like the idea that 2 of us could be talking to another couple folks or another person. And it may be the case that I see an opportunity for you and I want to champion that idea. And so I'd say, with the exception of those cases, which I'd say are edge cases, for most folks at a networking opportunity, I try to suggest people avoid talking to their friends, because when you cluster up like that, you become unapproachable, right? A group of biomedical engineering students standing in the corner is not a group that I'm going to walk up to and find out what they're up to, right? I'm just like, they're busy.
The game is a fun idea. And even faculty who I would invite to events would sit in their little cluster of their people. And it's like, this is my posse. I'm not going to get outside of the circle that's really comfortable for me. And I also try to reframe people's mind about networking in terms of thinking not that you're there to network, but you're just there to tell stories about yourself. Like this is a way to, if you're humble, think about it, you're just presenting the best version of yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to put a lot of pressure on yourself in these situations because you're like, oh my gosh, there's people that could hire me here. And that's true. But you don't have to, who cares? There's probably people that could hire you at the grocery store. Importantly, I think something that students tend to have a lot of anxiety about is, oh my God, I need to get a job right now, or I need to do this right now. And that sense of urgency can cause people to become uncomfortable or panic or not really have a smooth engagement with people at a networking event. But I think one of the things that I talk to my students about all the time, right? I get a lot of students who come in my office and are like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm a senior. It's December. I don't have any job offers. I don't have any interviews. It's like, it's okay. You have a lot of time, right? You're like in your early 20s. You have like a whole decade before it really starts mattering whether or not you have started to build a career. And I mean, I'm not saying be lazy. I'm saying be tactful, right? Take your time. Don't jump into the first opportunity that comes your way unless you absolutely have to. You know, be judicious, do your research. And it's okay. Like, networking is sort of practice for everybody. Everybody who's there, who's walking up to you, is probably also feeling a little bit of discomfort. So, you know, getting used to that is important. On the first day of senior design, I say, you know, you're going to learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's a really important skill because I think if you can learn to navigate those uncomfortable situations and be okay with being a little uncomfortable, you'll get a lot further in those networking events or in an interview or when you're working in a group project and there's no clear definition for what you're going to end up doing or, you know, navigating difficult situations. I think if you're comfortable with being uncomfortable, you can get a lot further than if you're just going to panic and let it lock you up.
This is how you're supposed to feel. This stress is actually your nervous system telling you that this is important to you, and it doesn't have to paralyze you. As we think about all these students you've interacted with, and I know through your awards, the William Friday Teaching Award, which is so prestigious, I know, I got to mention it, and your students petition to get you this job, which I think is incredible. I'm just so... I know if I was sitting in your classroom, I'd be so excited because you care about them, you care about your subject. And with all these people that you've touched in their lives, what do you think would really impact them to be successful in the future? And I know we talked about communication a little bit and networking, but what's another it factor?
So, I mean, technical skills and communication skills aside, which I think are important, but those are sort of what I lump in as like sort of professional skills. I think if I were to pick one or maybe two things that sort of define what I think make a hireable, desirable teammate, those are important, right? But it's probably more like the willingness to learn. And I actually was thinking about this a lot the last kind of day or so as I was reflecting on the questions for today. I think, because at first I was tempted to say like drive and motivation, but that doesn't really quite capture it because there's an element of drive and motivation that doesn't get the idea that you need to continue growing. So I think a growth mindset is important. And when I look at students who have succeeded and people that I look up to, they continuously learn and they continue to have a growth mindset. And I can point to examples of people that are driven, motivated, have great technical and communication skills that don't have that and they just don't get that far. And the reason is because when they go to pitch their idea, or when they go up for promotion, all they're worried about is themselves. They don't think about how they can grow and change and sort of be agile in the face of some challenge. They struggle a lot. And it's easy to see that. When you see a person who, you know, if I set two people next to me and I interview them, I'm going to know really quickly who's got a growth mindset. That's the kind of person I want to hire because they're going to become a good leader. They're going to be a good mentor to other people because they're also going to show, instead of just say it's important to learn, they're going to be doing it and they're going to be asking questions and they're going to be learning and continuously learning. So I think if I were to pick one item that hasn't been covered, it would be the sort of growth mindset, the ability to sort of say, I didn't know that, or I'm going to look into that, or oops, I was wrong, I need to fix that. I think when you have that attitude, people are just more willing to bring you along for the journey and like pull you up.
I think the growth mindset is so important, and I'm glad that we're concluding with that today. Yeah. We actually have had our time fly by, so I am going to invite you back next week if you'll come.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to do a part 2 with Dr. Devin Hubbard, so definitely tune in so we can hear a little bit more about his story. I know the listener wants to know more about your background and when you've struggled and stumbled and done some of these things, because part of our podcast is just normalizing that being a human is hard. So let's see you next week.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.